computer. Let's see if that seems to be happening. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our election discussion group at the Salem Center at the University of Texas Austin, McCombs School of Business. I'm Greg Salmieri. I'm a senior scholar of philosophy at the center. We've had one of these sessions before where we've chatted about the ideas and the political views and motivations that each of us were bringing into thinking about the election, and just started to talk about issues pertaining to this election. We don't have all and only the same people from that earlier session here. We have me and Jacob are both on that earlier session. I think Carlos may be joining us later. I'm not sure if not. He'll be back next week. And Tiger, I believe, will be joining us a little bit later today. But the other three people we have with us here are new, and so I thought we'd start out by asking them to say a little bit about what we all shared last time, which is what's your story in thinking about politics? Where do you come from, and how is this influencing your thinking about the current election? What are you planning on doing this time through? And let's start with Megan, who was telling us a bit about herself in this regard before we went on air.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Megan Wright. I'm the program manager for the Salem Center for Policy. I grew up in a very democratic household. My parents are very on the left side of things, I would say. I think I adopted my thoughts towards that as well. I think it was shaped pretty early in my life, my political beliefs. I do think as I'm getting older, on certain topics, I sway sort of more to the middle than I used to. But I would say that rarely ever will I swing towards the right.
One thing that's worth our all thinking about is what these terms like right, left, and middle mean. And I think they mean a lot less than I used to think they mean, both because I think the meanings of them have been shifting and my thinking about them has been developing. So when you say there are issues on which you are more to the middle, but you don't shift to the right, what would be an example of a place where you've moved to the middle on, and what you think moving to the right on it might be?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, so healthcare is something that comes to mind. I'm a dual citizen. My dad's side of the family is from England. And so, I've grown up sort of looking at these two different ways to examine healthcare. And I did graduate school over in London as well. And when I went there, I didn't really know how to act at the doctor's office because I was not used to not having to do a copay or follow up on that. I thought that was really interesting. But I don't know, because the structure that we have in place here, if something similar to that would work here. I think that we need to be more flexible in our thinking. And I think that not everybody on the left is thinking, Medicare for all and on board with what Bernie Sanders is saying and everything. But I definitely think that is becoming more and more of a popular view. But I don't think I would ever go further than the center, because I do think that there needs to be some sort of option for everybody. Because I know that in the past I've been super ill and haven't gone to the doctor because I simply didn't have, $300 that it would take to go. And I think that there's something seriously wrong with that. So I would say that, I kind of dance in the middle there, where I think that the Affordable Care Act, although it could be improved upon, was generally a good thing.
So then the right would be, in effect, privatizing healthcare more so than it is already in America, or maybe staying at the present level of private public. The left would be moving to more of a single payer kind of system, and the center would be aggressively pursuing some kind of guaranteed universal coverage, but not by necessarily single payer or.
Yeah, and while allowing people to still choose private healthcare insurance.
Thanks. That's interesting and helpful. So, George, you told us also before we went online a little bit about your evolution in politics and how you're thinking about this election. You want to share with us now?
Yes, actually. I was born in Eagle Pass, Texas, which is a border town about 4 hours south of here, Austin, Texas. And being born there, I was actually raised most of my life in Mexico on the other side of the border, the sister city on the other side. And, growing up in Mexico, the political landscape in Mexico is obviously very different from the one we have here. But growing up in that landscape in some sort of manner taught me to be very cynical about politics, which is to say, distrustful and apathetic in some regards, thinking that not much would change regardless of which candidate got elected. And when I was introduced into the United States, the first time I went to school in the United States, second grade when I was 7 years old, that was just 1 year prior to the election of Barack Obama, which was something fairly important, I think, in American politics. And that's the first thing I remember of my introduction into American politics. And all after that was a realization that politics doesn't have to be cynical, and that different candidates, at least here in the United States, do have different impacts in the country. And people generally from both parties are trying to help. They might have different visions of what that help looks like, but generally speaking, I developed to believe that most people who are in politics, or at least a good part of them, actually think about the better society they're working towards. That being said, still fighting that with my cynicism, still being on the border. 2016 comes around, I am still what I consider to be fairly left-leaning in most of my beliefs, from healthcare to the free markets, all of that.
Could I ask you, when you say still left-leaning, do you associate the cynicism with the left-leaniness, or these two different things about yourself earlier that you've solved up?
Part of striking down that cynicism was adhering to one of the sides of the political spectrum. Because in the cynicism, there's, I believe, not a side.
No, because you don't think it doesn't make any difference, so why be on one side or the other?
Exactly. So finding out that it does kind of make a difference, I did start my political journey being more left-leaning, but still a bit cynical, because 2016 rolls around and Hillary is on the ballot. And although I'm not old enough to vote, that's who I'm rooting for, because I believe that either candidate, Trump or Hillary, was not a very good candidate. So there's the cynicism peaking up again. But I thought at least that with 4 years of Hillary, we would have what I thought, maybe naively, another 4 years of Obama, which we had 8 of. And, things didn't seem to go that bad. Of course, when I say that, those 8 years of Obama, I analyzed when I was 8 years old to the time I was 16 years old. So it is possible that I may not have had the best information available. Maybe I just didn't dig through it enough.
But life in America seemed good to you at the time, in effect.
Yeah, I had a good life here, but mainly I think most of that was those 8 years, those first 8 years, basically, that I was in this country, were really good to me. They were, and obviously better than, I think, my life in Mexico. And I still lived in Mexico for the first, since second grade all the way to 8th grade. I was in a private Catholic school. So that means I didn't actually need to keep a residence in the United States. So I actually lived in Mexico, and I would commute, cross the bridge every single day and every single day back. So for those first 6-7 years of my life, the difference was a lot. I liked the United States. It was easier to be in the United States. It was safer. At that time, Mexico had its own problems with safety, and there are concerns that we just didn't have in Eagle Pass. So I would remember I wanted to go to a friend's house when I was about 9-10 years old. And if that friend lived in Mexico, it was always a strict no. We're going to school, and from school back to home, and we're staying there all day because of the shootings, of the kidnappings and all that. But in the United States, it was different. So I want to go to a friend's house. I mean, yeah, you can stay there all day if you want to. My parents would tell me.
So part of what I'm interested in, all of us thinking about, is what do we value about America that we're trying to preserve and enhance, with our engagement in American politics. That we're worried if things go badly, we might lose, and if things go well, we hope they might get more like this. So one of the things, they don't need to be unique to America, they need to not be everywhere all the time. So one of the things you really noticed was America's safer than Mexico, at least the parts of America and the parts of Mexico you were traveling between.
Yes.
And is another the cynicism? Are you still cynical about Mexican politics in a way that you're not or less so about American? Or was that just your evolution and maybe both politics, or there's more?
No, I think definitely time has proven me right in being cynical about Mexican politics. I think the last president we've elected does show that Mexico is capable of change. Unfortunately, in my opinion, that hasn't been good change, but it has been very different from what it had been before. Very different, in my opinion.
So what grounds the more optimism of America and more cynicism of Mexico? How would you spell out what's different about the politics of the two countries such that you're hopeful in American politics and not so hopeful about Mexican politics?
It's I think the public perception together with the perception of those who are actually involved in politics. So my main takeaway from Mexican politics is that there are a lot of parties, for example. They don't just have the two-party system, they have, a lot of parties, and even within those parties, they have different, sub-parties in different states and in different cities even. And a lot of what I saw was politicians just trying to climb up the ladder and other politicians trying to tear them down, and just continuously like that. I just didn't see anything other than we are better than that other party, for no other reason than we are better. That's basically the message that every single political party has. There's no key issue. There's not a more conservative party or more liberal party. There is a party who was in power and a party who is not in power. So naturally, the opposition saying,
it's gangs sniping at each other, so to speak, rather than people articulating different visions of where they want the country to go.
Exactly, because they all actually articulate the same vision. I want Mexico to be better, We want to end corruption. We want to end organized crime. But all of them had the same ideas as what to do. And it was clear that those ideas were not working, whether because of the ideas were bad or because the corruption just did not allow for those ideas to flourish. But I come into the United States and I see people actually engaged in a tug of war between left and right, actually outlining what precisely they believed in, And every time, at least, I saw that those people who pulled to their particular sides actually wanted to make things better. They identified a problem and said, this is what I propose as a solution. And sometimes that solution says, we should offer medical care for all of our citizens. That's how we're going to make this better. And another solution pulling to the other side would be, if you want more people to have insurance, which is what we want, we have to make it this other way, which is to let the free markets, take effect. And regardless of your opinion on those particular stances, I think actually seeing people believe in something, pull towards the side, but really having most of the political life here just wanting a better America because they actually care and like it here, It's something important, it's something special that we have. I think that's exactly what got me to bring my cynicism level down in politics.
Do you see, you mentioned the issue of healthcare. I would like to see the free market govern healthcare. That's what Megan identified as more the right, and she's sort of coming to the center, and there are some people on the left who want more of a fully socialized or single payer medical system. But I don't see the Republican Party as standing for free market medicine. I don't see them proposing specific free market reforms. Maybe in some other fields I do, but that sounds like you're describing the Republican and Democratic parties I'd like to see arguing about the two ideas they get associated with, but I don't see it. I don't see it happening. Right now. I don't know how you're thinking about it.
So definitely, I think you're absolutely right. Maybe I should have been a bit more clear. What I meant with people pulling to the left and right, I mean liberals and conservatives. Because conservatives and libertarians and people who lean more to the authoritarian side, those people, I think, not identifying by party affiliation, but actually identifying by the core beliefs people have. Of course, in any country where you have a two-party system, all the people in either side are going to have to compromise on their values a lot.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, having 320 million people in the country, you don't fit nicely within 2 or even 3 parties. But sometimes more important beliefs or a majority of beliefs or overarching beliefs take precedence, you know, and
So how is all
and you
this?
have to choose a party.
So
So sorry. Just to that point you made, I do believe you're right. The Republican Party is not offering what I believe to be an effective solution to the Medicare problem. I personally, like those on the right, believe that we would be benefited from free market solutions. I don't see the Republicans doing that. I do think it's not very politically popular. I understand maybe why they're not going for that. I just don't think it's helping any people what they're doing.
So you, as you say, one has to make a choice, or one's not going to find. One could not vote, but I mean, or vote for a third-party candidate. But you're not going to get a majority of the people wanting exactly what you want all the time, and you have to decide how to act in light of that often. So, how are you thinking about this election in terms of that?
Well, I myself have key issues. So, for example, gun rights. The healthcare thing is important. The climate change thing is important for me. But overall is the power of the state against the power of the people. The importance and the prevalence of the Constitution and our rights. That is the way I am thinking about this election. I think we're threading a very dangerous path where we have a lot of people openly and willfully disregarding the Constitution, and in my opinion, disregarding the truth that our rights precede government. You know, we have them before, and I don't think that's good. And I see it on both sides, and I also see the opposite on both sides. I just feel like for this particular election, we are better suited with Donald Trump on that regard.
So, could you say a word or two about why? So, there, as you say, there are people on both sides who you see as wanting to dispense with the Constitution or ignore it, and people on both sides who are pushing back against that. What particular actions, either positive of Trump or negative of Biden, convince, or policies, or what about these two guys convinces you that if we are concerned with maintaining a constitutional system, that Trump's a better bet than Biden?
Okay. First of all, I would say rhetoric. There's only one side talking about packing the courts. There's only one side about abolishing the Electoral College. There's one side about subverting constitutional rights in order to, in some sort of way, curb the Second Amendment. And I feel like those are pretty fundamental to the relationship between the people and their government. And so that's as far as rhetoric goes. Second, policy. Any time a politician tries to implement policy which is not careful about the rights of the people, I think that's always bad. I think those should always be at least a consideration, if not a priority consideration, that people should make when drafting up policy. For example, things like the Green New Deal, you know, which very obviously, in my opinion, curbs the right of people to choose their energy sources, you know, overhauling the economy in such ways we will probably discuss later. You know, gun control legislation that could also subvert the constitutional liberties, and a lot of others. And that's why I side on this end.
A good sense of we'll come back to some of these issues. I just want to hear from Saum. Is that how you pronounce your name? And just tell us a bit about your where you're coming from in thinking about politics and how you're viewing this election.
Yeah, so I'm Saum. I'm a third-year MIS major, born in India, immigrated to the United States when I was 2 years old, been here ever since. I guess all my life I've sort of been on the left, very close to the like social democratic left. I guess I could kind of approach politics from like the policy standpoint. So like I'm pretty interested in like public policy, especially like healthcare, tax policy, and like foreign policy. So like I read about those topics a lot, and that's sort of how I analyze like the political situation. Of course, I do care about like other issues as well, but like I guess my main focus is on those three I mentioned.
Okay. And how does that lead you to think about this election?
So yeah, as you can guess, probably like from the things I'm interested in and like what I just said, yeah, I'm voting for like Biden probably. That's and probably for the Democrats like down ticket, at least with the national level.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like I feel like seeing as I'm in Texas, which is potentially in play this election cycle, I feel like it doesn't hurt to vote for the Democrats. Now, if I was in say California or Massachusetts or like a deep blue state,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't know if I'd vote for Biden at the presidential level.
So
Just because,
when you be torn about whether to vote for Biden, is it because you might want to vote for a candidate who you see as further left, or because you might want to vote for Trump, or or not vote? What's the alternative you envision, given that I gather you see yourself as more left leaning?
yeah, I'd probably be voting for somebody more to the left, whether it's like, you know, writing in Bernie Sanders or, you know, the Green Party. But like I said, because Texas is potentially a swing state, that's why I plan on voting Biden, because I think the alternative is just worse. Like it's probably the worst.
Yeah, so the issue is, given the choice between Biden and Trump and between a Democratic Senate and House and a Republican Senate and House, you want the Democrats. And so if you think you're in a place where your state might be in play, you're going to vote Democrat. If you're in a place where you don't think your state's in play, you're inclined to engage in some kind of protest vote or third party vote or other vote that may help to motivate the Democratic Party to go more left, in fact, or at least show that you wish they would go in a more left direction than they do.
Yeah, I think that's a fair like comparison. And again, I just want to like highlight that that doesn't mean I'll never vote for a Democrat. And like if I ever lived in a deep blue state, so I think there are like I think there are like Democratic senators within like the mainstream of the party in the Senate, like Ed Markey, who I think have like the correct position on like climate change and like a lot of other issues. And so I wouldn't mind voting for them.
So it's sounding like, for example, on the Green New Deal, which George mentioned a moment ago as something he's concerned about being a way in which the Democrats, maybe even a Biden administration, would be moving against the Constitution as George sees it. I'm gathering you'd be for the Green New Deal, which is something that's coming out of what's seen as the more left part of the Democratic Party. Or maybe that's not the right way you think to address climate change. You think there's another way you prefer?
So like I don't remember the like key provisions of the Green New Deal. Like I'm kind of familiar with like what they might be, but I don't remember the exact details. Like I just think we need to like address climate change. So if the Green New Deal is the way to do it, that's fine. If there's another way we can do it, and you know, get as much support for it, then yeah, that's fine as well.
So what I'm interested in, because so George, you're worried about that kind of policy making being an attack on the Constitution. Salm, do you see, when you support more environmental regulations or whatever you think will help, do you see that as to hell with the Constitution, let's save the environment, or do you see that as, no, I'm for the Constitution too, I just think this is what the Constitution means in this context? How do you, like, are you guys gonna, you know, it seems like George's conception of someone with your politics on the environment is, this is a guy who doesn't care about the Constitution. Is that how you see it also, or do you see it differently? Sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth, George.
No, like I guess I don't really see it that way. I'd be interested to hear like George talk about like exactly what he thinks is like, I guess, unconstitutional about like the Green New Deal. I feel like that it would be easier for me to like answer the question if I had like a good idea of like what he kind of meant.
I think that's fair, since the Green New Deal is not your word for what you want. I just burdened you with it. It's also, we should mention, not Biden's word for what he wants, right? He says, I'm not for the Green New Deal, I'm for this Biden plan, which has some things similar and some things different. don't know, does anyone who is, what do people think who are more pro-Biden than pro-Trump about the concerns that some of the kinds of things George associated with a Biden candidacy, court packing, possible legislation on guns, a Green New Deal, are some paying fast and loose, at least with the Constitution? Maybe Jacob, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about court packing. And this is just something that I've been looking into recently because I wasn't really aware of it until this has come up right now, and it came up more in the presidential debate that just happened. I think the fact that I think that it's interesting because I don't necessarily agree with having 9 Supreme Court justices and then that they have the say over everybody forever until they die. Like, I just think that is really extreme to me. I don't think that it's it's not going to represent the people because there's much more broad diversity in thought than even just 9 people can represent, especially if they're being chosen by a 2-party system who can, swing radical to either sort of way. And I say radical in the sense of like trying to bring up whether abortions are going to be legal, illegal, how the access and stuff is going to be. I consider that a radical thing. So I think that there needs to be some sort of change happening within the Supreme Court. I also think like court packing, it's hard to say because there's so much that goes behind choosing like a judge, and there's so many people that can block it. And during the debate, I was hearing, Trump saying, well, you guys left me, I can't even remember, 100 something plus seats. And I was like, that seems crazy to me. Like, why would anybody who's leaving office do that? And then I found out that, it was blocked at so many other levels. So I just think that there needs to be more say for the people in who gets these positions rather than, politics kind of just pushing each other around and blocking each other and these politicians doing that. I think, to me, that's not representative to the people. As far as the Green New Deal, I honestly haven't read up on it in a long time. I think that it is extreme, right? Like, I think I've heard people say like, oh, people won't be able to eat cheeseburgers anymore because they're not going to have cattle farms anymore. And, of course that sounds extreme. I want to be able to eat a cheeseburger whenever I want. It's one of my favorite foods, So to me, I'm like, wow, that's extreme. But I also think it's extreme to pull out of the Paris deal and just pretend that this isn't an issue on a global scale that needs to be addressed. And the United States, as the powerhouse that it isn't currently addressing it or isn't on the same level as other countries who are trying to take it seriously. And I think that's really problematic.
So it seems like you're seeing yourself as valuing moderation. Let's spend a minute on just what court packing is, right? So the idea is there are 9 Supreme Court justices now. It was the case that there had been, some of them were appointed by Democratic presidents, some of them appointed by Republican presidents. We've now had 2 appointed by Trump, both replacing previous judges who had been replaced by Republican presidents and now we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a liberal icon on the court, having been appointed by Clinton, passed away, and there's an issue of who's going to replace her. The Democrats are upset because when Antonin Scalia died during the last year of Obama's presidency, it was thought Obama would choose his replacement, and he did choose a replacement for him. But the Republican-controlled Senate didn't confirm or even vote whether or not you didn't have hearings on him. And then Trump came in and named Judge Gorsuch, who replaced him. So that would have been the first time in a while when a judge appointed by one party was replaced by a judge appointed by the other party, but it didn't happen because the Republican won the election and appointed him. Now we have what seems like a similar situation. It's towards the end of a Republican's presidency. A judge appointed by a Democrat died. You might think that the same thing would happen, and some of the rhetoric that the Republicans used last time would lead you to think they would this time say, well, let the next president, whoever it is, Republican or Democrat, appoint the new judge. But the situation's not exactly the same, because this time the Senate, the same controls is in the Republican hands, and you need the Senate to approve the candidate the president picks. So Trump has named a judge, Judge Barrett, to replace Ginsburg, and now it looks like the Senate's getting ready to appoint her. So now you'll have a court with 6 judges appointed by Republicans to 3 appointed by Democrats, as opposed to 5-4. And in various ways, some Democrats think that's unfair, and the process by which we got to it is unfair. And one thing that has been proposed as a solution by some is court packing. And what court packing means is simply adding judges to the court. So they could make there be 50 judges, and then the next president has to appoint all 50 of them. And so if the Democrats have the Senate, no one's talking about making 50 judges, but maybe 11, and they appoint, they say Biden wins and the Democrats win the Senate, and maybe they appoint 2 more judges, and then instead of a 6-3 court, you have a 6-5 court, or maybe they do more and you have a 6-7 court. So that's the idea of court packing. To my knowledge, Biden hasn't endorsed it and has kind of thrown cold water on that. I don't think he said there's no way in hell we'll ever do this, but it's not an idea he's been championing. It's more an idea some on the left have suggested, and Biden hasn't, I think, weighed in on, or he's kind of moderately against in what he said, is my understanding. But I mean, here's a question: would court? 2 thoughts. I mean, we might wonder whether court packing is a good or a bad idea. A second question from whether we'd support court packing or not is, would that be a constitutional measure? Or would that be somehow going against the Constitution to do it? Because you could think it's unconstitutional and good, to hell with the Constitution. You could think it's constitutional and good. You could think it's unconstitutional and bad, or constitutional and bad. Does anyone have any thoughts on that, or know, where we are constitutionally?
It just seems like it would be another, tool in the toolbox to hold leverage over bills that should be passed, legislation, compromises. It just seems like another thing that would just make the polarized political situation worse. Not that the Constitution shouldn't be re-examined. It's a document written 250 years ago, and not everything should be seen as gospel that was written in it. But at the same time, I don't think that was the intention behind it either, that we could just adjust it based on the needs, because we want to rebalance things, because we feel like it's unfair the way it played out.
Would court packing be adjusting the Constitution? I mean,
well, it's true, right? It's not explicitly stated, but I don't think it's as it was intended either. The court is supposed to act as the judicial branch to balance the executive and the legislative branches. Right? So I just don't think it would be ideal for that to be the case. And I know Biden is probably just holding it in his back pocket and didn't want to address it during the debate. I don't know if he didn't want to address it because he's like, it's a ridiculous question, or if he didn't want to address it because he wants to not address it. I don't know, but it was interesting to watch.
My understanding is that it's constitutional, and that the way the Constitution is written, it's up to Congress to make decisions about how many people are on the court and so forth. So if the Congress decides to make there be 11 people on the court, they would be acting within their constitutional powers to do that, or 12 or 13. There's a wider question about whether it's a good idea, whether it's in the spirit of the Constitution. And I think a reason to worry that it's not is that it may be further politicizing the court. And that, Jacob, that's what you're raising. I think the response that Democrats would make is Republicans politicized the court when they held up Obama's nomination because they wanted a Republican nomination, even though there were so many months until 11 months or something into the presidency. And you might have thought, well, that's okay if they acted the same way the next time the thing happened when Ginsburg died, but they didn't. So they've politicized the court, and we're just trying to put it back. I think that would be the Democratic argument, but I, for my part, fear that it would, if they went to court packing. But it seems to me like a kind of escalation, a further escalation of politicizing the court, and that's why it's one of the things I'm more worried about as a possible negative consequence of a Biden presidency and Senate. I don't want to see a court packing happen, but I don't see it as kind of throwing out the Constitution. I see it as a further. I see it as worrisome, because then I think, well, then the next time the Republicans hold all the houses, they're going to add 2 more judges. The next time, we're going to end up with an 80 court, so it's something I worry about for that reason.
I just came off mute right before you said that, because although I don't think that, 9 court justices can be representative of the United States people, I don't think that the answer is necessarily court packing, because then it's just going to be an ongoing problem until we eventually have to figure it out. Because like you said, each time somebody controls the Senate, and the presidency, they're just going to keep court packing. So within the next 4 years, everything can go their way, and then the next 4 years, and it will just bounce back and forth until, like you said, like how many are we going to have? 50 more? Like that's, so I don't necessarily know what the answer is, right? If I knew all the answers, I would scream them loudly. But I don't think court packing would necessarily be the answer, because there's going to be that ongoing problem. Why wouldn't we just keep packing the courts every single time each party takes control? That would be this, thing to do if everybody's doing it.
And the worry about that isn't just that there get to be too many, but it makes it more nakedly that everyone on the court has a political allegiance. Whereas one hopes that the people on the court are doing their best to interpret the Constitution, and maybe they have different views of how to understand the Constitution, and plausibly that lines up somewhat with their party affiliation. They interpret it one way, and that's why they were a Republican, and that's why a Republican judge appointed them, and likewise for Democrats. But you'd expect their interests to be not narrowly political, not my base is riled up about this month, and therefore this is what I'm going to do, but more along the lines of, I've had a 50-year or 40-year career of thinking about the Constitution, and here's how I think about it, and here's what I think is going to happen 50 years hence from now, and a more kind of principled stance than you expect from someone who maybe has their finger to the wind about the electorate. But if you have the people who have their finger to the wind with the electorate constantly adjusting the court based on whichever one got in power last week, you worry about the court changing too much, it being too directly democratic in the sense of being not only representing the people in some holistic sense, but representing the mood of the moment of the people, which I see one of the innovations of the American constitutional system as that our government doesn't do that. It doesn't move quickly with the changing moods of the people, although it does move over time to reflect glacial changes in consensus views of the people.
I think that's absolutely right, for starters. I do want to address a couple of points regarding the court packing, and I think Megan is absolutely right in saying court packing is not the answer, because when will we know it's too much? So one candidate does it, the other candidate does it again. When will we stop? And as far as the constitutional issue with it, there's nowhere in the Constitution that says there has to be 9 Supreme Court justices. There's actually no number set in the Constitution. An odd number, of course, is preferable to an even number for obvious reasons. You don't want to have a lot of decisions that are going to be split and gridlocked, and then just, actually that would negate the purpose of a mediator like the Supreme Court. I do think there's a problem with 9 people on the Supreme Court deciding very important things that affect everyone, or at least a lot of the people. And I think the answer to that is to tone back and dial back the judicial activism that we've seen take place over the past. In general, I would say it's true. They should not have this much power of the people. There is a reason why the judges, the justices, are 2 times removed from direct democracy. We have to choose a president who's going to appoint a judge, and then we have to choose a Senate who's going to confirm them. And I think there's a reason for that. And one of my fears is not that it's going to politicize the court, which it might. The problem is that it's going to democratize the court in a way that it shouldn't be, in my opinion. I think the framers had a very good reason for removing the Supreme Court from political issues, because in my view, at least, the Supreme Court is not supposed to be political. Like Gregory said, I think it is very important that they determine whether something is constitutional or not. And the differences are going to come with how to interpret that constitution. And I don't exactly see that as political. I think that it's just a feature, not a bug, that people will disagree about what the Constitution means. And we will mediate that in the
Yeah, so hi, can I?
Oh, Tiger? Yeah, come in.
Yes, hi Greg. Hi Jake. Hi everyone. Sorry I use this funny name. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I just I'm from UT, and sorry I use this phone to attend this discussion because I still have family in China alive, and I try to keep it that way. So yeah, so about the Supreme Court, I was thinking, so how about, I have several points I want to discuss. So what about adding a tenure on the justice, on all the justice? That's my first point. The second question is, I think right now, nowadays, in reality, every solution to solve a problem would very much likely cause new problems. That is just, I think that is just a fact. And I think that depends how badly you want to solve the problem right now, how badly you want to solve the politicizing of the Supreme Court. And I also think that the Supreme Court being more and more political is a fact, it's a trend that we cannot change. The point, I think the focus is not to how to depoliticizing the Supreme Court. I think the more important thing is how to deal with it's getting more politicizing. So I think, I wouldn't say that I'm 100% for court packing, but I would say diversify the court might not be a bad idea. And if we have, I think maybe first, I think my solution on the first thought, I think first we can add tenure. The second thing is maybe we can make it more difficult for the president to appoint a justice. For example, right now we just have the Senate. We have the president's appointment, and we have the Senate. Maybe next time we can add more rules, more obstacles for the president to appoint that justice. Even if the one party has controlled both houses, we make that one party impossible to approve that person. So we make it a bipartisan effort that you have to have bipartisan agreement to appoint any justice on the Supreme Court.
Well, one fact relevant to this is it used to be that you needed a filibuster-proof majority to confirm a Supreme Court justice. And the Republic, I forget which party did which, but the two parties have been rolling back what things you need filibusters apply to, because if you control the Senate, it's just an issue of the Senate rules. And the Democrats pulled it off something, then the Republicans pulled it off something else, and so forth. So it's now the case that you can confirm a Supreme Court appointee with a bare majority in the Senate. And Trump's 2 appointees were confirmed with a bare majority in the Senate. Gorsuch, not I think because he was so personally controversial, but because people were, Democrats were upset about him appointing someone other than Merrick Garland. And then Kavanaugh, of course, there was this controversy over sexual harassment charges with him. But you might think that one way to do something like what you're suggesting, Tiger, is to reinstate the rule that you need a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate to confirm a justice, and maybe to do that in some way that is not easily changeable by a bare majority in the Senate. So one
Yeah,
thing
exactly.
you might think could be done, because it's hard to see why a Democratic Senate majority would do that, but maybe if it could be done as part of some deal, like this is not something I'm advocating, but you could imagine something like, we'll pack the court this one time to get us up to 11 justices. We won't go to 13 or 24, but what we're going to do is we're doing this just because we thought this was handled improperly in the last election or two, and we're going to do it in such a way that makes it harder for us to have total say over who the justices are, and makes it harder for future Republicans. You could imagine some kind of bill that increases it to 11, but also it reintroduces the filibuster. I don't know if they could make that have teeth, but that's something somebody thinking along your lines might consider as a way to diversify or require it that there be more people signing on before somebody gets onto the court. Salm, did you want to say something on this? It looked like you were.
Yeah, so kind of just agreeing with everyone else. I kind of agree that like the Supreme Court does need to be like depoliticized, and like court packing is just going to cause like a lot of escalation between both parties. So I think, I think the original like purpose of the Supreme Court was to like appoint justices who were above like politics, I guess. And I feel like having, just be a fist fight in the Senate is just kind of going against that purpose. So I think the way they need to like figure out Supreme Court like appointees and nominations is basically there's like two options, I think. One is to like model it on like the federal regulatory agencies. So like the FCC and like the FTC, they have like a 6-member board, 3 people appointed by Democrats, 3 people appointed by Republicans. In the Supreme Court, you can say that you have one person who has to be appointed in a bipartisan manner. Another like proposal that I've heard is basically have like 3 people appointed by the Democrats, 3 people appointed by the Republicans, and the remaining 3 justices have to be unanimously approved by the other 6 justices. So that way, it's not as politicized, and then there's a lot of consensus building. I'm generally against like reintroducing the filibuster for other reasons. I don't think we should have the filibuster. I think we need to sort of democratize the country. And I feel like the filibuster, all it does is it just allows the minority party to block anything. And because of the way the news cycle works, like voters don't understand that when something died in the Senate, it's not because like the Senate, it's not because like, the majority party didn't have enough votes or anything. It's because the minority party was able to block it using a provision that technically wasn't even in the like Senate rules. It came about in the early 1800s. It's a long story, but so like those are my 2 cents. I'd be interested to hear what like other people think.
I do think that you hit something there when you said we have to democratize this country a bit further. I don't think the way we do that is by doing away with the filibuster. I think it's another thing you touched upon. For example, agencies like the FEC, the FTC, federal agencies like that are allowed to make rules and laws that apply to the rest of the Americans, but we don't get to vote on who those people are. They are appointed and then they get to legislate, effectively removing the legislating power from the Congress, the people we elected to legislate. I feel like if we want to democratize this country further, which I think in some cases is a good thing, in some cases not such a good thing, we have to, I think, start by chipping away and eroding some of the power that has been misplaced in the hands of regulatory agencies in some regards, in some cases, because I do feel the Congress is relinquishing a power that by the Constitution it should have sometimes when it does that.
So we're shifting now from the court to the issue of what some people on the right call the regulatory state, or what some people call the regulatory state. But let me ask this question in a way that puts together, George, two issues that you raised, and Sam, I'll be interested to hear what you and Jacob and Megan and Tiger all think of this. But so suppose, as has sometimes happened, there was a challenge to the regulatory state before the Supreme Court. There was the idea, and there have been suits, I think some of them are actually pending, about cases of this sort that say it's unconstitutional, it's wrong to entrust some of this quasi-legislative authority in executive branch departments. Therefore, the Supreme Court should strike down some of the laws establishing the powers of these regulatory agencies. If the court were to do that and strike down those agencies, right, that's the sort of thing that would be called judicial activism by people on the left, just like Roe v. Wade and Casey are called judicial activism by people on the right. On the other hand, you might say, and people who support Roe might say, that's not quote judicial activism, that's just interpreting and enforcing the Constitution, and that's the court's job. So what is judicial activism? I don't want to answer that question, but I just want to raise it. It sometimes, and maybe we'll take it up if we do another session on the court, it sometimes seems like a word for when the court does what I don't like. Everyone thinks the court should do something. You don't want a passive court that just sits there. And what we think it should do is enforce the Constitution. So is judicial activism just what we call it when we don't like what they think it means, or what? Because the Lochner court, right, is decried by by a lot of Democrats as having been an activist court. That was the court that overturned a lot of New Deal legislation, and then eventually it stopped. And so it's just a question as to what do we mean by the court. Okay, but let's then spend a word or two on the regulatory state. I just want to see if anybody else has thoughts on it other than George, and particularly thoughts on how it relates to this election. Do you see one or the other party doing something about it? And then I want to move to, as our last issue to discuss today, an issue that Tiger brought up by implication, which is foreign policy. Implication in that he's worried about the Chinese Communist Party and the safety of his family in China. Do we think one or the other of these candidates is better with respect to keeping the world safe from governments that you have to fear what they're going to do to your family? But first, on the regulatory state, or is there too much power in the hands of regulatory agencies? And if so, what do we see, in what way do we see this election impacting that?
I can say my 2 cents. I don't have a strong opinion on this, but there are certain parts of our economy that I do think are over-regulated, and I think there's parts of our economy that definitely need to be regulated more or be kept the same. I think what Trump's done to roll back regulations, I think he said something about for every, we'll only add 1 new regulation for every 2 we remove. And I think that was a good step for a lot of industries. I know for me personally, I'm interested in the alcoholic beverage industry, and it's a highly regulated industry where laws are different in every state, and you can only sell distilled spirits in this place, but you can only sell wine and beer in this place, and you can't do this, that. But it's a crazy world that you need to have a legal background to fully understand. And I think there's a lot of industries like that that are overregulated. The environment, I think, is one that I'm getting more and more passionate about, needing to take action now versus later. And I think our national parks, for instance, selling our public lands, I think people need to protect those lands. And I think that we need to have agencies to do that. And I think there needs to be regulations that stop people from overhunting, from deforesting, from overmining, from fracking, all of that. So it's a nuanced question, but that's just kind of my 2 cents. And I think Trump, for a lot of the economic stuff, he does do things that do boost the economy, but you got to make sure it's not at too much of a cost, especially to the environment and to the general good of the public.
Too much regulation in some areas, not enough in others, and it's hard to.
Yeah, it's a nuanced question. I know we want to talk about one versus the other. I think I don't really know Biden's opinion on things, but I know he does want to increase the corporate tax rate, and I'm sure he wants to also get a little bit stricter with the Fed and all the stuff that we've done to boost our economy, maybe at what he might describe at the expense of some other people.
So one of the issue that George was raising, though, as I understood it, with the regulatory state, isn't just that there are restrictions on what you can do on federal lands, or restrictions on how much pollution you can emit, or restrictions on what alcohol you can sell where. But the specific idea that instead of Congress passing a law that says you can't frack, or you can frack, or you can only frack in these places but not those places, Congress passes a law that says there's going to be an agency in the executive branch, and then that agency will come up with detailed rules about fracking. And so Congress doesn't come up with the rules. It appoints this agency under the executive branch, the president then appoints people to, and then those people write up all these rules, and no one voted on those rules. And in fact, the people who made the rules you didn't vote on. And that's, in effect, why Trump can have a policy of, I'm going to get rid of 2 regulations for every one I put in. Whether or not he really did that's a good question. And how do you count regulations anyway? Because it's not like they're numbered. But you'd think if these regulations are something like laws, Congress would have to do them. And yet Congress hasn't done any deregulation over the last 4 years. What's happened is in these various executive agencies, Trump's appointed people that are rolling back some of the rules that have been promulgated, whereas maybe Obama appointed people that put in place more rules. And it's not exactly true, because in some areas Trump's done more in it, but that's part of what's going on with regulation. And that leads me to my thought on this is Trump's been deregulating in some areas. Some of that deregulation I think is good, others I'm not sure about. In other areas I think he's probably regulated more. But what I don't count that as deregulation. Because I think the real regulation is the fact that the president and his appointees get to tell you where and how much you can frack. And that's the thing that I don't like. So I would count as deregulation if the president and Congress got together and passed laws saying this government agency is no longer going to be in charge of this, and they're no longer going to be making up rules about this, and so forth. And that kind of thing has happened. So under both Carter and Reagan, there were like laws passed by Congress that deregulated different industries. The airline industry is one example. What I see going on under Trump is not that we're rolling back the regulatory state. It's just that the regulatory state's there as much as it was before. It's just Trump's regulating differently in a way that's more favorable to some industries and less to others. And we can maybe agree or disagree about whether his way of regulating is better or worse than Obama's was. And maybe we'll disagree about that. Maybe Jacob will think Trump's not regulating oil industry enough, and maybe I think he's better on oil. Or I'm not too versed in the details of all of this. But that, to me, rolling back the regulatory state would be if we actually started passing laws, or maybe if a Supreme Court challenge gave less power to these agencies altogether. And I don't know. I mean, the Republicans didn't do that when they had all 3 branches of both branches of Congress and the presidency in the first 2 years of Trump's presidency. You could imagine some in the Republican Party wanted to do that if they ever have the opportunity in a second Trump term. But it doesn't seem to me to be something that Trump is running on. I don't expect it to be something he would really want. So for my part, I don't see Trump as any kind of I don't see a Trump presidency as more likely to rein in the regulatory state than a Biden presidency. I think there's very little chance of it happening under either. All I see is it's about how is this or that industry regulated for the next 4 years, and that's not changing the regulatory state. It's just who's holding the whip in his hand, so to speak.
So I think I agree with you a lot that we're not going to see a major change in, or at least not a major rollback in regulation. And I don't think that the Republican Party, at least at the national level, with the president, when they have the both houses, is doing a good job of making that a priority. I think it should be a priority. They're definitely not making it a priority. There are members of the party, senators, representatives in the House, who do believe it's a priority, but overall as a party, I don't believe they're doing a very good job fixing what they identify to be the problem. At least I think that under a Trump presidency, we are not going to see major rollbacks on regulation. We might even see new regulation. And the effectiveness of said regulation, can be debatable. The constitutionality of said regulation is also debatable. I think the real issue is avoiding more regulation. And I think there's not a very good chance that regulation rolls back in either a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency, but I do think there's a very good chance that regulation increases in a Biden presidency.
And that means newly legislated regulation, as opposed to just that the administration promulgates some new rules. That's what a Green New Deal would be, for example.
Exactly.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about foreign policy, but looking at the time, maybe it's best that we hold that off till next week. We haven't said anything really about the debate, so why don't we just go around the square, and any thoughts about, for those of you who watched it, about this week's debate, and then let's maybe make that what we sign off on today, and we'll come back probably next week around this time, and we'll have a few topics then. Hopefully foreign policy will be one of them, if nothing in the news preempts it.
Can I just start on the debate really quick? I have
Yeah.
to sign off right now, but I couldn't help but to give my thoughts on it before doing so. But then I have to run. And I was just saying thanks everybody for the conversation, and I'm looking forward to the next time. I think the debate was awful. I think that so many times my anxiety was just like pumping, oh my gosh. I wish that we were able to hear about policy issues that are relevant, plans that, whoever holds the seat next year will do with basically anything. I don't think we got to hear anything from anybody. I think that it was sort of more, well, this other guy's worse than me because of this, but it didn't have anything to do with policy. I don't think we really got to hear people speak at all. And to me, that was just super frustrating, because I was really hoping to hear some key policy issues. It's been an interesting campaigning season, obviously. So I wanted to see how the two would interact with each other. I wanted to see how Biden would interact on the spot rather than scripted. And I just wish that I could have turned it off, because to me it was more anxiety inducing than it was informative.
Do you have any thoughts as to why this was, or who's to blame for it?
I mean, I want to say that I definitely think that Trump is to blame for it. I think that there's agreed upon rules before the debate for a reason, and I think that if you're not going to follow them, then your mic should be cut. I almost wished that this was over Zoom, so the moderator could just force mute people, because I really wanted to hear what people had to say. With that being said, I know Biden didn't hold back from interrupting as well. I think that it was really, I understand, I think he was trying to make a political statement when he was saying, shut up, man, and stuff like that. But I still think that the presidential candidates should be respectful, and I think that they should be professional. And I think that if I was in any sort of job interview and I acted like either one of them did, I for sure wouldn't have the job. It wouldn't even be a question. I would be out of the job interview completely. And I think that we need to hold, the highest office to the same standards that, anybody in any sort of job application or job interview would be held to.
Yeah, I've been bothered by interrupting in all of the debates, in the Democratic debates with one another up till now, and I kept on, why don't people have mute buttons? They should have mute buttons. But this, I thought, was a new low to it. But apparently there's talk about giving mute buttons if they have more debate. I say only if, because now with Trump and a COVID diagnosis we haven't talked about, I think that puts a lot of there'll be a time for quarantining, and I think it throws the debate schedule into question. I fantasize about not just mute buttons, but the candidates like above dunk tanks, and if they go on too long, it
That's great.
drops them in. But maybe that wouldn't add to the dignity of the occasion.
I think shock collars would be a good addition to the debate. Talk out of turn and you get shocked, just a little, maybe.
George, did you have any thoughts on the debate other than I'm gathering you agree with the interrupting in both directions wasn't good from your expressions, but any thoughts on anything you might have learned from it or came out of it? Was it of any use?
Yeah, definitely. I think the debate was mostly entertaining rather than informative. I think everybody agrees with that. And whether you think it's good entertainment or bad entertainment, just I think depends on your sense of humor. Yeah, it was annoying. It was not a good display of what it's just not the best America has to offer. You kind of have to wonder how we ended up at this point, that the two choices we have, one of which will end up being the president of the United States, is what it is, I definitely see, I don't want to say it's leniency. I want to say it's resignation on my part. A sort of resignation I don't see from a lot of people, and I see from I see from maybe like 50-50, I would put it. And this sort of resignation, by this I mean Trump is who he is, and this is not an excuse. This is just saying that I'm not surprised that he interrupted so much. It's what I expected. It's, I think, on level with his performance on other debates previous, his performance in front of the media, and I just don't think it was out of character for him. I don't. Is this good? No, it's bad. How did he end up being our president? The problem, I think, is there's a disease, and Trump is just a symptom of that disease, not the disease itself. And I think until we start recognizing that, we're not going to get better candidates, and we're going to get candidates such as what we have now. So on another point, the interrupting, I expected this from Trump. I expected Biden to be more presidential. I think he has always been sort of that figure because he's always been in positions of power ever since he was in the Senate, Senate Judiciary Committee, the head of that committee, the vice presidency. It really did a lot for his image, in my opinion, when he looked presidential. Now, I believe that you can't have a candidate or a party that seeks to combat all the divisiveness and the insulting nature of the other candidates. They seek to combat that nature by using the same nature. I'm just not convinced that someone telling me, yes, I'm better than him because I don't insult people, and then they go around insulting that same person. And I'm better than this person because I don't interrupt, and then they go interrupting themselves. And I'm better than this person because I am more decent, and then go around and being indecent to that same person. I don't think it's completely uncalled for. Trump is a very abrasive person, in my opinion. He calls me names. I think I'm entitled to call him names. I just can't run on a platform that says, enough with the name calling, enough with the rudeness, let's go back to normalcy, and then turn around and do exactly the same thing I just accused my opponent of doing. So I think that's a big problem. And I think a lot of people see that. I don't think it makes a lot of changes for people.
Trump's behavior was unacceptable, but Biden's not responding to it in the right way. And his responding to it is undermining his pitching himself as an alternative to Trump.
I actually think he responded in the correct way. Somebody yells at you and insults you, you yell and insult back. The problem is when you run on a platform of specifically not doing that. When you run on a platform of saying insulting and yelling and screaming is bad, and we should go back to times where this was not the norm, and then perpetuating that thing which you seek to destroy, which is the rudeness we find ourselves, the divisiveness we find ourselves in.
So I think in the end, it amounts to you don't see a solution to this aspect of Trump, which you dislike in Biden. And there are things from the left that you fear Biden would cause or engender. And so despite thinking Trump's maybe a larger scale example of this thing you don't like in the culture than Biden is, that's not enough to push you to Biden away from Trump, because Biden's not enough better on this. And there's still the issue of court packing, gun rights, Green New Deal, and such that you're worried about.
Exactly. I think an annoyance of mine is when people pretend that decency is the most important thing on the ballot. And the reason that annoys me is because I just don't see a decent candidate. There's no, maybe Joe Jorgensen, which I don't fully agree with, couldn't bring myself to vote for her, maybe not. Um, but even then, like we just haven't seen her on the debate stage. We haven't seen her as a prominent figure on the national stage. So we wouldn't know how she would react to that platform. But as far as the two candidates, I'm just not seeing any decency here. So I can't expect decency to be a big issue on the ballot. So that being said, with the character of these men being what it is, I think it suits us better to focus on the real world consequences of the election, the real world consequences of the decisions these candidates might make, whether or not I am better off with one or with the other, whether or not Hispanics, I think, are doing better, or blacks are doing better, or any other demographic is doing better under one candidate or another candidate. I think that's what we should look at this election.
So one question to take up for next time, or one of the next times on this heading, is do these kind of characterological differences make a difference in do issues of character and tone, whatever you want to call the things that we all agree Trump is lacking in, and we all agree Biden's lacking in, although maybe less so than Trump. I think less so than Trump. Do those things have real effects? Because some people, say, look, I like Trump's policies, or you should like Trump's policies. What people object to about him is his tone, his personality, etc. Is that right? Or are these kinds of things that have effects on what laws get passed, how diplomacy is done, how foreign policy works, how the country responds in times of crisis? Whether they do and what kind of effects they have and what would be solutions to them, I think is a big question. I myself think they have major effects. But let's take that as a topic for one of our next meetings. And I still want to hear from Jacob, Tiger, and Tom on any impressions from the debate or things that came out of the debate other than the ones, I mean, you say a word or two about all the interrupting, but particularly if there's anything other than that stood out to you guys.
I can say a few things.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was, but mostly my reaction was pretty emotional. I think I was outrageous after watching the debate. I was really extremely angry because I think Donald Trump is a bully, is a fucking bully, and no country, no matter what is the excuse is, no country should vote a bully as the head of the state. No country. I don't care about what policy is. I don't care if all the politicians are not decent. If he didn't even want to pretend to be decent, he didn't even care the consequence of him being a bully, then no country should vote that person. That's what I think.
A sense of maybe you think it's obscene to even ask a question when you're dealing with a bully like that, but could you give me a sense of, is this just an aesthetic objection, or could you give me a sense of what the horrific consequences you see are from having someone be a bully in charge? Like,
yeah,
I think
first and foremost that shows a signal to all the bullies in the country that being bully is all right. I don't think if Mitt Romney becomes the president, or even Ted Cruz becomes the president, the white supremacy organization will be like they are right now. You show that attitude. You don't have to pass any law. You just show that attitude, that ill attitude, and do not get consequences. You're just telling everyone it's okay to being like that. It's okay to behaving like that. You don't have any consequences. I think that's the first and foremost. And the second point is, I think all the interrupting, that's exactly what Trump wants to do. He just wants to I don't believe for a second that Biden don't have policy. Biden don't have everything that lay out. But Biden and his team and the party team don't have all the data. It's just, I think that's Trump's strategy to interrupt Biden, that Biden cannot have the time or the focus to lay out all his policies. And I think Biden interrupting Donald Trump or call him a clown is just it's more of a self-defense. If he do not fight back, people will call him weak, call him soft. That is just what Trump called Biden. And if he fight back, then Donald Trump successfully brought Biden down to his level. which is what's happening right now. No matter what Donald Trump do, people who will vote for Donald Trump, be it you're a white supremacist, being you're racist, or you support Republicans' policy, you will still vote for Donald Trump. But if Biden acts even a little bit like Donald Trump, some of the Democratic supporters probably won't even vote for Biden. I think they're being unfairly harsh to Biden. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I want to interject here. Sorry. I know I've spoken too much. Just a quick comment. I think I disagree with you in that regard. I think that disregards the main reason Trump was elected, which was he did not pretend to be decent in a way that other politicians did. And I think the problem is with that was that politicians were not decent before Trump. They just pretended to be for the public. But then you have, for example, I think Mitt Romney, was that 2008 or 2012?
2012.
Yeah, so then you have Joe Biden, for example, saying that Mitt Romney is going to put y'all back in chains, referring to the African-American crowd in the debate stage. And particularly, I think that's a very indecent thing to say. And I think that's a very harming thing to say if you don't actually have the evidence to back that up. And I think the reason Trump won is because he did not pretend to be decent where other politicians did. I think people were tired. Half of the country, at least, was tired of pretending that this wasn't politics. But it had been the case for years before that. And Trump, I think, provided an alternative.
Yeah, I understand that.
Which people saw as honest, I think.
Yeah, I understand that. But
George,
the problem
it
is
sounds
still
like
being, sorry.
Go ahead.
Are people tired of being decent or tired of politicians pretending to be decent? I think one of the consequences of Trump being like that is some people interpret it as we are tired of being decent. Not being decent is okay. If Joe Biden said something indecent, he paid the price. He got criticized. He probably won't say that again. If he said that again, there will be another price for him to pay. But Donald Trump not being indecent and not paying any price. And that is, I think that is a price for the entire country to pay.
George, it sounds like what you're saying is, I wonder how it fits with your earlier comments about cynicism.
Yes.
Because the idea that what let Trump win is that he didn't even pretend to be decent where the other people were pretending to be decent. It sounds like you're saying the Trump victory was an embrace of cynicism on the part of people.
Actually, I think the Trump victory was a shedding of that cynicism in some regards, because the only way we get to Trump is, I think, 8 years of Obama, consecutive 8 years of Democratic presidential rule. And people grew cynical under this presidency. They, I think, got tired, like I said, of politicians being dishonest with them, always concealing their words, always measuring their words to make sure that they're still electable. So then we have this other person who comes in who many people regard as a political outsider, which I think that's true. You know, never before had he been, in any elected office. And he just says what's on his mind. And what's on his mind is not particularly good and it's not nice, but he is the first person who they can look to and say, well, at least this guy is saying what's on his mind. He's not measuring his words. He's being honest with us. He doesn't like these people, so he's going to call them what he thinks of them. I don't think that's good in politics. I think honesty is good in politics. I don't think we want to elect bad people who are honest about their badness. I think that's a problem. But the problem is when we elect bad people who are not honest about it.
But isn't the move from bad people who try to conceal their badness to bad people who flaunt their badness a move in the direction of cynicism? It's like we're not even gonna pretend to these ideals anymore. When you have an ideal that you hold but you break it, you're at least saying this ideal matters, and you want to be held to that standard, even if you secretly flaunt it and pay a price, as Tiger says. If you're saying no one could live up to this ideal, no one does live up to this ideal is outdated and it doesn't matter, to hell with it, and I'm going to flaunt it in public, that sounds like so no one in Mexico, it would seem like, thinks the politicians are good, as you described Mexico. I don't know.
So let me restate that. I think it moves away from cynicism in the whole political sphere, but you're right. There is a certain cynicism that grows against what I would call the elite political class. You know, people distrust those people. People distrust career politicians now. People don't want those people because they know they are, you know, maybe in some cases backhanded, they are not honest, and there is a real cynicism towards those people. But I just don't see the lack of engagement that I think a cynicism in the whole political system would bring. I think Trump actually broke away from that.
I have a sense that you and I are somehow not quite talking.
I think we're maybe talking past each other.
What we're saying, but in the interest of time, let's see if we can work that out later, and
You got it.
let's see if Sam or Jacob has anything they want to share about the debate.
I can go ahead and say something. I mean, I think you guys have touched on a lot of the themes that I got out of it as well. I think the candidates did a disservice to not ever answer a forward-looking question without attacking each other. I think there's a lot of people hurting economically. Obviously, COVID is real and it's caused a lot of death and sickness. They didn't really have an action plan for how we can move the country forward on that. And yeah, to echo what Tiger said, I do think Trump was the main culprit in that. It's not even a question about decency that he would just talk over Biden. And if I was in Trump's camp and I was a supporter, I would have wanted to let Biden, you know, just try and complete a coherent sentence, because he's obviously going through some, you know, cognitive decline, and he's an older gentleman, and he's struggling to really show that competence to be a leader that a lot of people look for in a president. And I don't think he could have just let him talk, and I think he would have been better served than by just talking over him nonstop. But I really didn't like what I saw. I think they did the country a disservice, and I don't think there's big value in it. It's funny to me that Trump tried to say he brought back Big Ten football as a way to get voters in the Midwest to vote for him. I thought it was kind of a joke. And I think he's kind of appealing to the lowest common denominator, unfortunately, by saying things like that. You know, so it's just not what I was hoping for out of a presidential debate. Neither of them were very presidential, to just kind of conclude my thoughts.
I just want to put a flag under as something for us to discuss later, this issue of, is Biden undergoing cognitive decline? And you might ask that about Trump too. They're both older men. You said it's obvious that he is. I don't think that. I mean, it's, I don't think it's obvious.
He has his bad days, I would say.
But he's always been a bit of a gaffe-prone guy. Maybe he's more so now, but I think there's been a real campaign from the Trump campaign and from elements on the right to portray Joe Biden as this kind of senile, not with it guy, all these kind of jokes about it. And, you know, once you have something like that in your head, it's easy for confirmation bias to take over and for you to see every time the guy flubs a word as evidence of that, and not see all the times he does something fine as evidence of it. And of course, it's very easy for any candidate to make anyone who talks a lot in public, including all of us here on this thing, it's easy to cut together a reel of them talking where you get 10 minutes and they seem totally incoherent. It was done with Hillary, it's been done with Trump, it's been done with pretty much everyone. So I think one way you know the concept of prior probabilities in statistics, my prior probability that there would be lots of material that made Biden look like he was senile, even if he wasn't, is just about 1. That is, even if he were functioning perfectly, there'd be a lot of people with that impression because there's a lot of work being put in to create it, and it's easy to. And so I want to think about, and likewise with Trump, and there have been lots of things making Trump look, as you know. So I really want to put it as a subject to think about rather than as something to just go with our guts on. What's the evidence as to these guys, each of their competence? They're older, and people who are older, you know, generally tend to slow down and decline a bit. And what's the state of the evidence with respect to each of these guys on that? And maybe that's something we can take up at some point. Sam, thoughts on the debate?
Yeah, basically everything that everybody else has said. I'm personally not a big fan of like debates, at least like what people imagine to be debates.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just leads to a lot of like signaling and just empty rhetoric. I think people like to act like Trump was different. I don't think that's the case. I think that's a story for another time, to be honest. I don't think we have enough time to like debate that. But yeah, just terrible, I guess. I had to turn it off in like 30 minutes. It was just too depressing.
So your view is, in effect, it was bad, but what do you expect from a debate? Debates are like this.
I'm more of a fan of like, say, like discussions where it's people just hearing out what the other person has to say and you're not just trying to one up each other. Now, like that's going to be a bit hard when you have like such high stakes as the presidency, and then like the news media obviously is going to like, they have their incentives as well, and so that's going to always lead to certain outcomes, I feel. So it's like Jon Stewart said, the media doesn't have a liberal bias. They have a bias towards like laziness and sensationalism. And I feel like that's not true all the time, but a lot of the time that's going to be the case. And so, yeah, I mean, I just don't think we should take debates that seriously, to be honest. Not saying we shouldn't have them, just saying,
Well,
treat them as they are.
I'm thinking we'll meet again a week from today. That's where Fridays seem to be our day. By that time, if all goes as planned, there will have been a vice presidential debate. There are questions as to how seriously we should take any debates, but if we think debates are a way to learn about the candidates, and particularly if we're worried about the health, mental or otherwise, of the two top of the ticket candidates, that might make us doubly interested in what we think of the VPs. And in general, people know less about Harris and maybe even about Pence than they do about the top line people. So maybe next time we'll have occasion to talk a little bit about the vice presidential candidates. I'm hoping also next time we'll be able to talk a little bit about the foreign policy issues that I hoped we'd have a chance for today, but I think we covered so much, many interesting topics, that I can't regret missing out on that one. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll resume next week.
Thanks. I actually think the VP debate is going to be more entertaining.
All right. Well, we've got a bold prediction from Tiger, and we'll see what we all make of that next week.
Okay.
Bye-bye all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
I guess.